Chapter 14 of Against Odds by Lawrence L. Lynch. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Lynne Thompson. Chapter 14. Missing. Carte blanche. It had been decided between Miss Jenrys and myself that the little brunette should not be altogether ignored, at least for a time, and I had taken it upon myself to provide the letter which was to put off until a more convenient season the proposed survey of the White City by night. After some thought I had written the following, and posted it, according to directions, in care of a certain café on 57th Street. Dear Miss B., I find that I can hardly evade the duties one owes to courteous friends, and must for a few evenings devote myself to these. It is very likely that some of the friends of my chaperon will visit the fair, perhaps this week, in which case she will perhaps be able to dispense with me for one evening. Therefore please inform me if you should, as you suggested, change your address, so that I may drop you a note when the right time comes. Yours, etc., J.E.J. This letter was submitted to Miss Jenrys, and then posted, but not until the superintendent had secured for me the services of a half-grown boy who had won a reputation as a keen and tenacious shadow. Him I set to await the coming of our brunette, and, lest he should mistake or miss her, I waited in attendance with him until she came, which was at an early hour and in haste. I had also placed a man upon Stony Island Avenue, armed with minute descriptions of Smug, Greenback Bob, Delbras, and the brunette, and with instructions to watch the cafés and houses upon a line with the fair grounds, and especially within a certain radius within which we knew parties of their peculiar sort were received and no questions asked. As for Brainerd and myself, we had laid out a new system, and upon it we founded a strong hope for ultimate success, though we recognised more and more the fact that we had to cope with men who were more than ordinarily keen, clever, and skilled in the fine art of dodging and baffling pursuit. In fact, I was now thoroughly convinced that they were living and working upon the supposition that they were constantly watched and pursued, and that they governed their movements and shifted their abode accordingly. There was one thing which weighed upon my mind, I had almost said conscience, and troubled me uncomfortably, and that was the attitude I was permitting the disguised brunette to maintain toward Miss Jenrys. Since she had entered so earnestly into the work of ferreting out the motive for the brunette's persistent attentions, she had manifested such a willingness to aid me by allowing that personage to continue the acquaintance already begun, that, while I appreciated it as an earnest of her trust in me, it was nevertheless embarrassing. I was not yet ready to tell her that I believed the brunette to be a man in masquerade. I must be able to prove my charge first. And yet I had determined that they should not meet again if I could stand between them. It was to speak an additional word of caution, and to tell the two ladies that two stalwart and trusty chair-pushers were engaged for their evening sight-seeing, that I set out one morning to make my first call upon them at their apartment on Washington Avenue. It had been decided that, even in such a throng as that of the White City, it would not be wise to meet within the grounds too often or too openly. We were sure of more or less surveillance from one source, and I was quite ready to believe that from more than one direction interested eyes were watching the coming and going of Miss Jenrys, if not of myself. Already I had tested the cooking and service of a variety of the restaurants, cafés, and tables d'hôte within the gates, and I had also found that outside, and especially within easy reach from the Northern or 57th Street gate, were to be found a number of most cleanly and inviting little places, more or less pretentious, and under various names, but all ready, willing, and able to serve one a breakfast, dinner, or luncheon, such as would tempt even chronic grumblers to smile, feast, and come again. I had breakfasted that morning at one of these comforting places, and upon leaving it had crossed the street to purchase a cigar from the stand on the corner, and having lighted it had kept on upon the same side. I had meant to recross at the corner, for halfway between the two streets, stationed beneath some trees upon a vacant lot, was a bootblack's open-air establishment which I had a mind to patronise. As I neared the scene, however, and glanced across, I saw that both of the bootblack's chairs were occupied, and upon a second glance I noted that one of the occupants was my recent acquaintance, Monsieur Voisin, Miss Jenrys's friend. He was busy with a newspaper, or seemed to be, and glancing down at my feet to make sure they were not too shabby for a morning call, I kept straight on, and turned down Washington Avenue upon its farther or western side. I had bought a paper along with my cigar, and as I ran up the steps of the pretty modern cottage where the two ladies had established themselves, I threw away the one and put the other in my pocket, wondering as I did so if Monsieur Voisin was also on his way to this place, and smiling a little, because I had at least the advantage of being first. It was so early that the ladies had not yet returned from breakfast, which they took at a café a rund the corner joost, so the servant informed me. But I was expected, and I was asked to wait in their little reception-room, where a sunshade and a pair of dainty gloves upon a chair, and a shawl of soft grey precisely folded, and lying upon a small table, not to mention the books, papers, and little feminine knick-knacks, gave the room a look of occupancy and ownership. I had just unfolded my paper and was glancing over the headlines upon the first page, when the two ladies entered, and I dropped my paper while rising to salute them. In anticipation of, or to forestall, a possible call from Monsieur Voisin, I made haste to get through with the little business in hand, and obtained from Miss Jenrys, without question or demur, her promise not to hold communication with the brunette, at least by letter, and to avoid, if possible, a meeting until I should be able to enlighten her more fully. "I do not want to lose sight of her," I said, in scant explanation, "and it seems that we can best keep our hold through her pursuit of you. But I would rather lose sight of her altogether, and begin it all over again, than let one line in your handwriting go into such hands." I avoided those false pronouns, her and she, when I could. "And hope and trust you may be spared another interview. Please take this upon trust, Miss Jenrys, and you too, Miss Ross, and believe that I will not keep you in the dark one moment longer than is needful." They assured me of their willingness to wait, even in the face of what Miss Jenrys laughingly described as a devouring curiosity, and then, while she turned the talk upon the fair and some of its wonders, Miss Ross, murmuring a word of polite excuse, took up my paper from the place where it had fallen from my hands. "Thee will allow me, I have not seen our morning paper." "Oh, Aunt Ann, I had entirely forgotten it," cried her niece contritely. "It's not important, child," replied the smiling Quakeress. "There is very little in it now except the fair, and that we can better read at first hand." Nevertheless, she began to turn the pages and scan here and there through her dainty gold-framed spectacles, while Miss Jenrys began to interrogate me concerning the mysteries of Midway Plaisance. "We hear such contradictory stories, and I do not want to miss any feature of the foreign show worth seeing," she said, with an arch little nod and smile across to her aunt. "Nor does Aunt Ann, and I don't feel quite like bearding all those Midway lions unguarded, unguided, and unadvised." I was not slow to offer my own individual services, in such an earnest manner that, after a little hesitation, and the assurance that it would not only not conflict with my business engagements, but would afford an especial pleasure, inasmuch as I had not yet done the Plaisance in any thorough manner, she finally accepted my proffered services for her aunt and herself, adding at last, "To be perfectly honest, Mr. Masters, I know Aunt Ann will never enter that alarming, fascinating Ferris-wheel without an escort, whom she can trust should we lose our heads and want to jump out 100 feet above terra firma, and I am quite sure I shall want to jump. I always am tempted to jump from any great height. Do you believe in these sensations? I have heard people say that they could hardly restrain themselves from jumping into the water whenever they ride in a boat or across a bridge." "I have heard of such cases," I replied. And so we talked on, discussing the singular and seldom met with, but still existing fact, of single insane freaks in the otherwise perfectly sane, when the gentle Quakeress, uttering a little shocked exclamation, and suddenly lowering her paper, turned toward us. "Pardon me, but, June child, what did you tell me was the name of the young man to whom thy friend Hilda O'Neil is betrothed?" "Trent, auntie, Gerald Trent." "Of Boston?" "Of Boston, yes. Why, Aunt Ann?" "I fear, then, that there is sorrow in store for thy young friend. Gerald Trent is missing." "Missing?" The Quakeress held the paper toward me, I being nearest her, and pointing with a finger to some headlines halfway down the page, said, "Perhaps thee would better read it." I took the paper and read aloud these lines: "Another World's Fair mystery. Gerald Trent among the missing. Another young man swallowed up by the maelstrom. Yesterday we chronicled the disappearance of Harvey Parker, who was traced by his friends to this city, where he had arrived to visit the Exposition for a week or more. He is known to have arrived at the Rock Island depot, and to have set out for the Van Buren Street viaduct en route for the fair. This was on Monday last, 5 days ago, since which time, as was stated in our yesterday's issue, he has not been seen or heard from by his friends or by the police, who are searching for him. Nearly 2 weeks ago, Gerald Trent, only son of Abner Trent, one of Boston's millionaire merchants, came to this city to see the Exposition and to secure accommodations for his family, who were to come later. He stopped at an uptown hotel for some days, visited the fair, and secured apartments for his friends, which were to have been vacated for their use in a few days. He had written to his family telling them to await his telegram, which they would receive in 3 or 4 days. When this time had expired and no telegram came, they waited another day, and then sent him a message of inquiry. This being unanswered, they made inquiry at his uptown hotel, and then began a search, which ended in the conviction that young Trent had met with misfortune, if not foul play. On Monday last he left the hotel, saying to one of the inmates of the house that he should have possession of a fine suite of rooms within 3 blocks of the north entrance, which presumably means 57th Street, within 3 days, and that he meant to send for his friends that day by telegraph. No message was received at his home, as has been said, and nothing has been heard of him since that day. Young Trent wore, rather unwisely, a couple of valuable diamonds, one in a solitaire ring, the other in a scarf pin. He also carried a fine watch, and was well supplied with money. The police are working hard upon the case. The list of the missing seems to be increasing." I put the paper down and looked across at Miss Jenrys. I had recognized the name Hilda O'Neil as that of her Boston correspondent, whose letter I had found in the little black bag, and by association the name of Gerald Trent also. Miss Jenrys was looking pale and startled. "Oh!" she exclaimed, "that is what Hilda's telegram meant." "You have had a telegram from Boston?" I ventured. "Yes. You perhaps remember the letter in my bag?" I nodded. In that letter Hilda, Miss O'Neil, spoke of Mr. Trent's delay, and of her anxiety. I did not reply to her letter at first, expecting to hear from or see her, for she had my address. It was only a freak my telling her to write me through the World's Fair post office, but when she did not come, on the day before I met you, in fact, I wrote just a few lines of inquiry. In reply to this I received a telegram last evening. I will get it." She crossed the room and opened a little traveller's writing case, coming back with a yellow envelope in her hand. "There it is," she said, holding it out to me. I took it and read the words: "Have you seen Gerald? Hilda." "Did you reply to this?" I asked, as I gave it back to her. "At once. Just the one word. No." "Do you know this young man?" I asked. "I have never even seen him, but I know that he bears a splendid reputation for manliness, sobriety, and studiousness. He was something of a bookworm at college, I believe, and has developed a taste for literature. You see, I have heard much of him. Oh, I am sure something has happened to him, some misfortune. You see, she had asked him to call upon me, and he would never have left Hilda, not to mention his parents and sister, 5 days in suspense, if able to communicate with them." "If he is the person you describe him, surely not." She gazed at me a moment, as if about to reproach me for the doubt my words implied, and dropped her eyes. Then she answered quietly: "The simple fact that John O'Neil, Hilda's father, has accepted him as his daughter's fiancé is sufficient for me. Mr. O'Neil is an astute lawyer and a shrewd judge of character. He has known the Trents for many years, and he already looks upon Gerald Trent as a son." "And Mr. O'Neil, where is he?" "Abroad at present. It is to be regretted now." I took up the paper and re-read the account of young Trent's disappearance, and Miss Jenrys dropped her head upon her hand, and seemed to be studying the case. After a moment of silence, Miss Ross, who had been a listener from the beginning, leaned toward her niece and said in her gentlest tone: "June, my child, ought we not to try and do something? What does thee think? Should we wait, and perhaps lose valuable time, while the Trents are on their way?" Miss Jenrys lifted her head suddenly. "Auntie," she exclaimed, "you are worth a dozen of me. You are right. We must do something. Mr. Masters, what would you do first if you were to begin at once upon the case?" "Get, from the chief of police, if necessary, the name of the uptown hotel where young Trent was last seen." "And then?" she urged, in a prompt, imperious manner, quite new in my acquaintance with her. "Obtain a description of him from some of the people there, and learn all that can be learned about him." "And what next?" she urged still. "Next, I would seek among the houses within 2 or 3 blocks from the north entrance for the rooms which he engaged, and which are perhaps still held for him." "Mr. Masters, can you do this for me?" She was sitting erect before me, the very incarnation of repressed activity, and I knew, as well as if she had said it, that she would never permit my refusal to weaken the determination just taking shape in her mind to do for Hilda O'Neil what she could not have done for herself, and to put it boldly, promptly, openly. She saw my hesitation, and went on hurriedly: "I know how busy you must be, how much I am asking, but you have undertaken to follow up that brunette and find out the reason for her interest in me, and surely this is far, far more important. A man's life, the happiness of a family, my friend's happiness at stake perhaps. For I am sure that no common cause, nothing but danger, illness, or death, could keep Gerald Trent from communicating with his parents and his promised wife. Drop the brunette and all connected with her, Mr. Masters, and give such time as you would have given to my affairs, and more if possible, to the search, I beg of you. At least, promise me that you will conduct the search, and employ as many helpers as you need. I'll give you carte blanche. Deal with me as you would with a man, and if I can aid in any other way than with my purse, let me do it." As she paused, with her eyes eagerly fixed upon my face, the sweet Quakeress leaned toward me, and put out her white slender hand in earnest appeal. "Thy brother's keeper, remember that a deed of mercy is beyond and above all works of vengeance. What is the capture of a criminal, of many of them, compared to the rescue, the saving, perchance, of an honest man's life? I beg of thee, consent, help us." There may be men who could have resisted that appeal. I could not, and did not. I did not throw my other responsibilities to the winds, I simply did not think of them at the moment. When I took the soft hand of the elder woman in my own, and, looking across at the younger, said, "I will do my best, Miss Jenrys. And that not one moment may be lost, tell me, can you describe young Trent?" "Not very well, I fear. And his picture, your friend must have that." "Of course," half smiling. "Telegraph her to forward it to you at once." "And has your friend at any time mentioned the hotel where young Trent would stop? Most of our Eastern visitors have a favourite stopping place." "I know." She had made a movement toward her desk, but paused and turned toward me. "I think it is safe to say that the two families would share the same house. They did in visiting the summer resorts, always. And I know where Mr. O'Neil and Mr. Trent went when they attended the great convention in this city." She named the place, and I promptly arose. "I will go there at once. But you may as well give me the Trents' address, and permit me the use of your name. If I am wrong, I will telegraph from up town for the name of his hotel." As I turned my face cityward that morning, I was not only fully committed to the search for missing Gerald Trent, but I was determined to convert my friend and partner to the same undertaking. And having now found time for sober second thought, I had also determined not to relinquish my search for the little brunette and her secret, nor for Messrs. Bob Delbras and company. Had I not carte blanche? As I left the house, intent upon my new errand, I was not surprised to see approaching it, almost at the door, in fact, Monsieur Voisin. We exchanged greetings at the entrance, and I had walked some distance before it occurred to me to wonder how it came that Monsieur Voisin, whom I had last seen at the bootblack's stand, 2 blocks north and east, happened to be approaching Miss Jenrys's residence from the south. Chapter 15